Hey everyone, and welcome to What the Bleep Should I Eat? A highly anticipated webinar where we are going to demystify those diet fads, decode some of the hype, and figure out what really works when it comes to eating in the real world. I'm Casey Holgan, Director of Education at Focus Personal Training Institute. For over a decade, I've been immersed in higher education, personal training, holding a master's degree from Columbia University in applied exercise physiology, and working as a certified strength and conditioning coach. Now, throughout my career, I've watched the field of nutrition evolve, sometimes in exciting ways and sometimes in really confusing ways. So that's why I'm really excited for today's conversation. I am joined by someone who really spends her days cutting through the nutrition noise, translating that really hard to understand science, ultimately help people fuel their bodies in real life results. Focus Integrated Fitness's performance dietitian, Marie Pasquereita. What is up, Marie?
How are you doing? I'm excited to be here because, yes, I spend most of my time helping people fight through that crazy amount of nutrition noise that we have now.
Yeah, because honestly, between TikTok trends and contradicting headlines and labels that say organic on a navy blue muffin, we're all a little lost. But by the end of this episode, I'm confident that the listeners will walk away with some real strategies that they can use starting today. So before we jump in, Marie, I would love for you to give us a brief introduction in your role at FPTI's sister's company, Focus Integrated Fitness.
Yeah, so I have about a decade of experience with sports nutrition. That's my background, performance nutrition. I've worked in the collegiate setting, I've worked in the professional sports setting, I've worked in the military setting. So at Focus, it's really two pronged what I do. I do one on one counseling with some of the clients. So that's basically that one on one care where we really just work on counseling, whether it's strategies for changing nutrition or sometimes it's just education, whatever that client needs. And then also, we just launched a platform called School, which is our nutrition, like our community nutrition platform through Focus, which is a really exciting content place where it's honestly kind of like this, where you have a week where you can log on, or excuse me, once a week you can log on and chat with me in this capacity where you just hop on and ask questions and I answer them in real time. So you have a real live performance dietitian. You can answer all of your questions that can answer all of your questions. And then also there is just a probably endless amount of content at this point on a lot of different topics related to nutrition. So some of it is myth busting, but some of it is also nutrition programmatics. If you want to work through a program to help you lose some fat and gain muscle, whatever your goals are, really it is just a content platform for focus clients. So it's been a really fun thing to build out.
Yeah, and today will be a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the topics that I'm sure are in that community. Before we jump in, I thought it'd be fun to start with a little bit of a warm up round because over the past week or so, I've gotten a ton of questions pouring in on my LinkedIn, and some of them are about hot diet trends, some of them are about wearables, and some controversial topics. So, if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of play a little bit of a rapid fire style game here. I'm going to give you a question, and we want you to give us your quick, no BS stance on the topic. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're gonna start with the first one, and I know you're gonna like this. It is, what is the best diet for weight loss and muscle building?
Oh my gosh, this is a rapid fire question. Okay. So obviously there is a lot of nuance and individualization related to that answer, right? I would say the two biggest things to think about would be calorie intake and protein. And really making sure that you're making food choices that are coming primarily from real food. The reason for that, and we'll get into quite a lot about that today. So,
Yeah.
again, this is a rapid fire answer. So, I'm not really answering this exactly right now, but making sure that you're making whole food choices if you're somebody that doesn't want to track calories, which I think for that's a lot of people. They really are just getting tired and bogged down with that word calories. So prioritizing protein would be a really big thing. And we'll talk about what protein sources are in a little bit. And then also making real whole food choices, balancing your plate and making choices in a way that it's not cumbersome to track your calories, but that just tends to be a portion appropriate calorie diet. That would be the most like mindless way that I would recommend people do it.
Yeah, and like you said, to start it off, right? Everything is individualized. There's no one size fits all approach, and I think most people, before they even go look at a diet, they should look at, well, what are they currently eating, right? What can
Right.
they
Yeah.
take away or add in prior to even looking at a trendy diet. So I know I'm going to bring that back up if you don't mind further in this episode. So we're going to go question number two. Oh, here is the controversial one, I think.
I don't know.
GLP-1s, Marie. GLP-1s, like Wegovy, are everywhere. Someone's on them at a gym setting or at a physician's office. How do they keep muscle while losing weight? And if you can kind of sum this up in like 2 to 3 must-dos, if someone is on a GLP-1 like Wegovy.
Yeah, definitely. I've been seeing this a lot lately. There are two huge things that people need to think about, and I just brought up one, and that's protein intake. And
Hmm.
then the second thing actually has nothing to do with nutrition, and it's strength training. Whatever that means for that person, it could be lifting weights, it could be like Pilates, anything that you're building muscle, and then you are supporting that with protein intake. I think people get excited when they lose weight, when they see the number on the scale come down, especially if they're on these medications. If you are continuing just to eat just a bunch of ultra processed food and not really thinking about your food choices, what happens is you're losing both fat and muscle. What that can do is set you up for being skinny in the future, but also being metabolically unhealthy, which is not ultimately what someone's goal should be. So prioritizing protein and honestly, for people on those medications, strength training, again, in
Yeah.
whatever form that means for them, needs to just be a part of their life.
Yeah, so looking at it from, lifestyle, and that includes physical activity and nutrition. Someone that gets, GLP-1 in, that's a new addition, right? They have to also look at and change some of their lifestyles and diets that they had prior to a GLP-1 to offset some of the downfalls that a GLP-1 would do, like you said before, that loss of muscle mass, which we know is key for longevity, which we're going to talk about shortly. Awesome. I got another one for you.
These could all
Um,
be their own 45-minute
yeah, I
conversations.
know, I know, I know, I know. I figured we'd have a little fun. This
Yeah.
is a true warm up. Speaking from a strength and conditioning coach, seed oils.
Oh,
So I know, friend or foe, do they really drive inflammation? And is that myth busting time? Is that something that we can kind of dive in a little bit in terms of inflammation and different seed oils?
yeah. So there is actually no good research to show that seed oils on their own cause any health detriments. And what's really interesting is people that push this narrative, it's a very American or Western way of thinking. Because if you
Yeah.
look at the dietary patterns of a lot of Asian cultures, they actually use like rapeseed oil as their primary cooking oil, like we would use like an olive oil here. And they have overwhelmingly better health outcomes than we do on average. I will say that we do have a problem with accessibility to seed oil and what we put
Hmm.
it in. And I think that's more the problem that we have with seed oils than the oil itself. What I mean by that is it's the oil that we used for almost all of our ultra processed foods, so stuff like chips and cookies and crackers and all that kind of stuff that we tend to overeat. And again, that's a really big part of what I want to talk about today.
Yeah.
So we do overeat them for sure, but it's not because of the seed oil. We're really rarely getting it from like cooking oils and stuff like that. We're getting it from eating I think I saw on last count, it's like the average standard American diet, we're getting up to 70% of our food from ultra processed food.
Hmm.
That is not what we should be getting it from. And so, yes,
Yeah.
we are overeating it, but it's not the oil itself that's the issue.
Yeah, and I want to go into the ultra processed, hyper processed, highly processed throughout this webinar because I think a lot of people misunderstand processed is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Refrigerating something is a means of processing foods to keep it a shelf life longer, but it's not necessarily a bad thing versus some neon blue muffin that has been ultra processed. So I definitely want to go
Yeah.
into that, which we will, and I'm excited to pick your brain. The next one is actually pretty interesting. I have a high demand job that I need to be mentally on all day. Is intermittent fasting the best diet for mental clarity? I'm curious to see what your stance is on that.
Oh, okay. Fasting is another one that this could be a 45-minute conversation.
Mm.
There are some potential benefits related to fasting, and some of them are potentially related to mental clarity. However, it gets really kind of over exaggerated what those benefits
Yeah.
could be, and it's frankly a very individualized situation. Some people seem to do better having some sort of fasting window. And some people, it leads to like sugar crashes. It might lead to them actually binging later in the day or earlier in the day, kind of depending on when they're not eating.
Yeah.
So that's really individualized based off of your job and a whole host of different factors. I would say more important than like fasting or not when it comes to mental clarity is again food choices, which is
Yeah.
again what I really want to focus on today. So thank you for setting me up with. It all comes down to food choices ultimately. Making sure that you're not eating foods that are super high sugar, super high in fat, particularly saturated fat, because those foods will make you feel sluggish, have an insulin response, have a high cholesterol response. So, yeah, it's more about limiting foods, particularly during the day. If you want to have that mental clarity, not eating tricks for breakfast, instead doing something like eggs with some whole grain toast and maybe some Greek yogurt, something like that. So limiting excessive sugar, limiting fat, that would be, I would say, more important. Appropriate portions, right? Also not eating this huge meal because that's going to put you into a food coma. Um, so that would be more important, I would say, than choosing whether or not to fast.
Yeah, and looking at, a biopsychosocial approach. If you're, not getting enough sleep and dehydrated,
Yeah.
that's also going to, cause fluctuations in energy throughout the day. But even something you mentioned before, right? Looking at how are you starting off your day, right? And what is that first meal? If that first meal is super, super starchy or has a lot of glucose and sugar in it, maybe looking at incorporating more fiber and fats. That way, there's not that big of a spike because what comes up must go down, right? And sometimes that when the spike goes down, that's where we can see a lot of energy deficiencies and mental clarity get disrupted. So awesome, and I agree. I think each one of these could be a 45-minute webinar. I do have one more for you. And this is actually something that I'm intrigued with. This came through actually the other day, so I'm excited about who sent this over. So, wearables, Marie, Apple Watch, Whoop, continuous glucose monitors. What are your thoughts behind these, and would you recommend a specific one, maybe for a specific population or individual?
So I have a love-hate relationship with wearables
Yeah,
myself. I think they can be useful, right? But I think that they can also be overhyped. Stuff like the Whoop you brought up, any of the smartwatches. I know Aura Ring is another popular one.
yeah,
There is value to some of the biometric data you can get from that. So getting stuff like, heart rate information. It does tell you sometimes about calorie burn, sleep scores. What's some other stuff it can tell you?
HRV.
HRV,
Yeah,
step tracking, all that. I mean, that can be valuable information. That is kind of good to know, especially if you are starting a new health journey and you're wanting to kind of understand where your baseline levels are. I think some of them get a little hyped up, like
yeah,
continuous glucose monitors. We really don't have any reason for somebody who doesn't have diabetes or prediabetes to wear that. I mean, and the reason for that is you can wear that and watch your insulin naturally rise and fall and your blood sugar naturally rise and fall as you eat food. Or I could just tell you, hey, if you eat that piece of cake, your blood sugar is going to go up. You know what I mean? Like, we
sure.
don't really need a monitor to tell us that. So having natural responses to intake of food is not really something that you need to micromanage, right? I call it like micromanaging your metabolism. You don't really need to do that. But getting some baseline biometric data, I think that could be good use in that. I mean, I'm a runner primarily, so I use the Garmin watch. So obviously I use it for my
Mm.
runs, but also it can tell me about recovery and stuff like that. So, I think all of them are relatively equal in terms of like the auras and the Whoop bands and stuff like that. They generally get the same kind of data. They usually use the same algorithms related to your heart rate. So, yeah, I mean, they could be useful, but it's not, don't make health choices based off of them. Just let
Mm.
it be additional data points for you to use.
Yeah, there's a shift of like hyper personalization.
Mhm.
Can wear an Aura ring that's partnered with a continuous glucose monitor. I can see how it's affecting my energy and my sleep. Like you said, it's more of an awareness piece, right? It
Mhm.
shouldn't be taken as gospel. If and I'm a wearable user myself, and if I wake up and my Whoop is telling me that I slept terrible, but I woke up and I feel fine, I shouldn't take it as, well, something happened, something went wrong, because there is going to be variance, right? But
Mhm.
what's actually happening? So that was awesome. That was a long warm up. I didn't realize it was going to take. But these are exciting topics, right? And these are
Yeah.
what there's current trends right now. This is what the average population is receiving, and it's hard, right? We just wanted to highlight a few of those. But Marie, why don't we really get into the title of this webinar? Is what the actual bleep should we eat? Why is it so hard for us to at a world when we have so much information at our fingertips?
Mhm.
Why is it hard to know what the bleep we should eat?
Yeah, so I kind of was thinking because I knew that the title of this of what I really want to what's really caused this misinformation
Yeah,
space with nutrition. I really identified like a couple of things that I think it is. So the first thing is people want this like very paradigm shifting content. They don't want to continuously hear vegetables are good for you. Make sure you're sleeping 8 hours a day. Don't eat excessive sugar, right? Like these are very boring messages that people have heard. And when you're, especially with like our media landscape, you're trying to sell something
right.
constantly. An influencer on social media, if you're a book, you're trying to sell a book, whatever it is. I
Mhm.
always tell people, the reason that you read these nutrition books and it sounds like somebody has found the golden ticket for, the fountain of youth or whatever, and then you try it in your life and there's like not really a change at all. It's like, well, that would that book have sold if it just said, "Hey, try sleeping 8 hours a day"?
Right, right.
No, it wouldn't have, right? So all this sort of rapid pace media landscape that we live in, you really need to push those like paradigm shifting pieces of content and like the tried and true, I mean, pardon my pun, the meat and potatoes of what is important for health is boring and it's just your repetitive habits. And people don't really want to buy that. They want to know what's that like new 1% thing that nobody else is doing. Well, I mean, the reason nobody else is doing is it's really not that important for health. I mean,
Right.
maybe it can make a tiny difference. So that's the first thing is just like the landscape that we live in, and like it's really an attention space. Like attention is
Yep.
is king these days. Kind of related to that, I would say is, I want to say that I think it's so important that you can go to PubMed Med and read research yourself. I think that open access to research is really important. However, very few people know how to read it appropriately and
Yes.
really actually understand what it means. I mean, most people just go in and they read the abstract or they find the one sentence that supports what they already think. And then they use that to further decide, like, hey, this is what I think. And because very few people are trained to read research and kind of figure out what it's actually saying and then have it kind of in the context of all the other research of that area, what happens is people will take that and either it's the media or an influencer or whatever and be like, oh, this study came out that said X, Y, and Z. I
Right.
can't tell you how many times I have, seen that, gone to the study that they've referenced, and the study said either the exact opposite was the conclusion, or
Yeah.
it really had absolutely nothing to do with the topic that they were talking about. They took it like so completely out of context. And again, sometimes it's malicious, sometimes it's not. But paired with, again, this attention space that we're all fighting for, they want the paradigm shifting. They want to find that one study that nobody else has read. So that's another thing too. And then I would say also there is sort of a distrust generally with institutions right now.
Right.
And I think part of that is because science and research is evolving over time.
True.
So, what we knew 50 years ago, we have really fine tuned our understanding on that topic. And 50 years from now, our recommendations will likely be different than what they are now. And I think that people see that evolution as like being lied to versus understanding, hey, this is what we thought this was the best evidence 50 years ago. And now we have better evidence. And so we have different recommendations. And I understand how that can be like really frustrating and create a world of mistrust. I think like eggs and cholesterol and our
Yeah.
understanding of heart disease in general is a really good example of that. How, back in the 90s, they said eggs were really bad for you. And now we know that, cholesterol and dietary cholesterol is really not super linked in the way, that's a whole other topic, but in the ways that we thought it was. But yeah, I understand how that can kind of sow distrust. And people are kind of saying, like, I have my own ability to go on PubMed. I'm going to find what's healthy. And then again, most people are not trained to read research in that way. So there's a lot of different reasons. Additionally, like, the last point I'll say is the marketing around food is like just absolutely
Oh yeah.
insane. And I have some examples of that
Yep.
later that I want to get into when we're kind of just talking about best food choices. But yeah, it can be really easy to walk into a grocery store and just be like utterly confused because
Yeah.
everything's claiming to be healthy. And then again, you've just gotten off of scrolling TikTok, which one guy tells you that like beans are killing you, and then the next guy tells you that red meat's killing you, and then the next guy tells you that water's killing you. So it's all just like incredibly confusing.
Yeah, it is, and I think that brings up a really important point, right? And it's the research because that's where we are, getting our information from. And I think a lot of people they hear there was a study that said, and immediately take it as gospel. And what most people don't realize is not all research is created equal. You have to look at how the study was done, who funded the study, whether the results were cherry picked, like you said before,
Mhm.
to prove a point. And that's where a lot of these companies that are running ads on different social media sites that are saying this is the best blank for blank. There's no such thing as the best, right? Because everyone's going to be
Mhm.
different and use it differently, right? And I think that was a good example with the eggs and the cholesterol as well. So let's break this down into a little bit more digestible points. Given that research is challenging to either read and understand, but do you have any like fundamental principles that you would like to share and provide for the listeners just to really where to start to know where to eat, how to eat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually going to go share my screen here.
Awesome.
So I can pull this up. Okay. Oop, let's see. Can I get this to go into slide mode? Sorry, everybody. Technology.
I think the visuals will help as well,
Yeah.
especially with just
There we
keeping
go.
things simple. Yeah, yeah, good, good, good.
All right, awesome. So this is some people call it a balanced plate. Some people call it a My Plate. It's based off of the USDA My Plate.
Hmm.
Which, fun fact, most people think that we use the food pyramid, which is another reason why people distrust the American guidelines. We have actually not used the food pyramid for over 2 decades now.
Wow.
So this is the My Plate, and it's very similar to this. So this is what I call visual wisdom, and this is really where I start with people when they want to start making dietary changes. That's a very easy visual way to try and make those changes. This is actually Harvard's version of the My Plate. I chose this. I just like the visual better, and then I also like how they include the visual of a healthy fat on here as well. But starting with what I call the color side of the plate, which is the fruits and vegetables. So at a meal, about half of your plate should be either fruit or vegetable. And then if you look at how it's been distributed here, about 2/3 of the choices should be vegetable choices, and then about a third should be a fruit choice. So a super easy way to think about that would be like fruit at breakfast, vegetable at lunch or dinner, but obviously you don't have to do it that way. So half of your plate, colorful fruits and vegetables, and the more variety of colors you can get, the more variety of fibers and phytonutrients and protective chemicals you can get. Next piece is going to be whole grains. So that's going to be stuff like rice, quinoa, barley, farro. This would also be a whole grain wheat, so wheat bread, wheat pasta, something like that. A general rule of thumb is you want at least, and I would say more, but at least as a starting point, half of your grains to be whole grains, and limiting refined grains, so like white breads and stuff like that, to less than half. I would argue you should reach for more than that, but if you kind of look at your diet right now and you're at 100% refined grains, I would say 50-50 would be a great starting point. So again, that should be about a quarter of your plate, and then about a quarter of your plate, maybe a little more of a healthy protein. So this is going to be a lean protein, stuff like chicken, lean red meat, so not a lot of marbling, stuff like eggs if you are vegan vegetarian, something like a tofu or a soy. And non-fat dairy, so like a Greek yogurt, something like that. And then lastly, having some sort of healthy fat incorporated on that plate. Oftentimes that's the cooking oil for either the protein or the vegetables. It could be nuts or seeds on top of the salad. It could be the salad dressing. It could be avocado. It could be olive, something like that. But what I challenge people to do is look down at their plate and just kind of be honest with themselves of how close to that balanced plate am I getting?
Yeah.
Because I would say the thing that I see more often than not is that grain portion turns into like 3/4 of the plate or 100% of the plate. The vegetable and fruit portion, the color, which should be most of what you're getting, is like the garnish of the plate. The healthy protein sometimes turns into something like really processed Jimmy Dean sausage, which is not maybe the best protein source to choose. So really, like I said earlier, when somebody asked about best for weight loss, this helps you portion, and this
Yeah.
helps with calorie control without even really having to think too much of it. Because most people, if they're honest with themselves, do not make a plate that is even resembling these types of portions super often.
Right.
So I'm going to kind of pause here for a second if somebody wants to take a picture of this, and we can always come back to it. But this is where I would say visual wisdom to start off with. And then, okay, hopefully you've gotten your phones out and you've taken a picture. And I'm going to go to the next one. All right, I have a couple of
Oh
examples of
boy.
this.
Yeah.
did
Now I
I
see what you're
did
saying.
the pasta trigger you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is Olive Garden. I always pick on Olive Garden because I just think it's a funny example that most people can recognize. But on one hand, we have fettuccine alfredo, which is their most popular dish, and it is 100% grain. And not only is it 100% grain, this is a refined grain. They're using a super high fat sauce, and you can see teeny tiny little sparklings of, like, I think it's parsley or something, right? So again, this is what I would call like a very beige plate. This is not even close to that balance.
Yeah.
Versus this is another dish that they sell at Olive Garden. This is a salmon with rice and broccoli. And just look at the proportions of that plate. You have a lean, high quality protein. You have about a quarter of that plate being a whole grain in that rice. They didn't achieve half the plate here, but close enough, a third of that broccoli. And the fish itself has some healthy fats in it. So, exact same restaurant, probably close to the same price, significantly higher nutrient quality in the one that's the balanced plate. Why is it higher nutrient quality? You have more fiber. Again, you have more of those protective phytonutrients. You have whole grains versus refined grains, so it's going to take longer to digest. You have good high quality protein that's going to support your muscles. You have everything that you need for health. You have everything that you need to not crash later, to not go into that brain fog later. But just by choosing the thing on the menu that you know is going to come out as a balanced plate, you don't really have to think about, what boxes am I checking? How many calories is this, right? Like, you have to think less about that because you just know it's going to be a balanced plate. And so it's going to be a lot closer to that ideal balanced plate than something like a pasta dish that is like 100% refined grains. Here's another example. This would be more like a lunch. I see a lot of people going to like bodegas or something like that for a quick lunch option. So here we have French fries that have been fried in oil. You've got the white bread, a little bit of lettuce peeking out there. See some lettuce and tomato, right? And then again, you've got that bacon, which is not necessarily the best high quality protein choice there. So you've got a lot of starches, a lot of that beige. You've got, again, almost 100% of this plate being a refined grain or a starchy veggie. Versus something like this, which would be a salad bowl. So, I mean, look at that. You've got a bed of lettuce. You've got a bunch of different other veggie choices there. You've got a quarter of that plate being the protein with the chickpeas and the grilled chicken. You've got some feta cheese on there for a little bit of fat. I'm sure there's like a dressing or something there. You've got some olives. And then you have a huge variety of different colors with other vegetables. Probably could order something like this at a similar style restaurant. But again, you don't have to go in and dig into their calories. You don't have to go in and dig into like what's the protein content of this. I can just tell you that doing something like a bowl like that just you can visually look down, check all four of those boxes and go, cool, I have a good balanced plate and they're in the right proportions. That is going to be so much closer to hitting all those nutrients that you need and making sure that you're not getting into that like sugar crash and just ate too much situation. Making sure you're getting that fiber. You're going to feel fuller a lot longer when you're choosing that bowl. So it's just, again, really easy visual cues that you can use to help you make better choices, both if you're prepping for yourself or if you're going to a restaurant and making choices.
And I purposely set this webinar during lunch so that people who are either eating, right, the bowl of pasta, they're gonna be, oh, okay, maybe I'll make a different choice next time. And people who are gonna go eat lunch in a little bit can make that right choice. That was all teed up to exactly where I wanted to be. So these visuals are awesome. Definitely want to get into some of the bigger nutrition myths and diets. But before we go there, I think most people already know, right? What's healthy and what isn't, right? Like no one's
Mhm.
going to order McDonald's or hit up Dunkin' Donuts and think that they're making the best nutritional choice of the day. So why is it that even when we know what's better, we still struggle to, let's say, eat better?
Yeah, so I have actually next thing here. Okay. So time and preparedness
Yeah,
are the two things that I almost always go back to, right? Because that's one of the things that I talk about with one-on-one counseling. Because, like you said, most people aren't ordering Domino's because they're like, I'm going to make a health choice. But then the question is, okay, well, why did you order that Domino's? Why do you always rely on that bodega across the street that only sells a bunch of different types of grilled cheese? Why are you making these choices? And sometimes it's, this is my comfort food or whatever. And But most of the time, the answer is I don't have time to cook, or I
Yeah,
just don't really think about it and I'm choosing what's around me.
yeah,
So I really want to kind of focus on food environment and
mm,
how to make that a lot better and a lot easier for you to make good choices. I love what you just said about this really is just boils down to eating real food, because really that is right. Like we talked about the plate and the proportions, and I don't want to demonize completely processed food because there is a time and a place for it. But like I said earlier, the standard American diet has 70% of our food coming from ultra processed food. I mean, that's just kind of
yeah.
unacceptable. And at that point, like we are missing key nutrients, we are
Oh yeah.
missing key compounds that are protective against stuff like cancers and can help with stuff like metabolic waste that makes us feel cranky and tired and stuff like that. So that is why, a lot of these foods might not inherently cause damage, but they're certainly not helping us recover, and they're certainly not helping us with, longevity goals and stuff like that. So what I recommend people do is first kind of think through your day. Maybe it's like every Sunday, maybe it's, take a moment, take 5 minutes once a week or whatever it is. Think through your week. Is there a day where lunch is going to be really hard for you get to? Some of you listening are probably like, "Hey, I never get lunch. I get into the office at 7 a.m. and I'm grinding until, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., whatever it is." There's a lot of people that work like that. So, what have you surrounded yourself with in the office? That are you setting yourself up for success or failure? Do you have an M&M jar on your desk, or do you have Greek yogurts in your fridge? Stuff like that. So I have up here this visual. This is kind of what I call the "Is It Food" test. Because I really liked the show "Is It Cake?" And I want to take a moment to say that those bakers are absolutely amazing.
Perfect.
But and again, this is not to demonize ultra processed food, but it is to take a moment to say, hey, how often is ultra processed food? Is that something you're really leaning on to be a big bulk of your day? So a good rule of thumb. So the sort of the official definition of ultra processed food is something you would not be able to make at home because it's got some sort of industrial ingredient in it that you would not have access to as like a home cook. So, for example, a protein bar or an energy drink, right? Another, again, visual cue that I like to give people is, could you tell me the first ingredient? Could you tell me the first ingredient of this protein bar? Could you tell me? I mean, you might be able to guess that water is the first ingredient of the energy drink, but could you tell me the first non water ingredient in this energy drink? Most people couldn't, right? Um, because it so far from resembles anything that we would consider a natural food. Versus something like carrots and hummus, versus something like a Greek yogurt with berries, versus something like grilled chicken strips and cucumbers, something like that. Those are all equally as accessible and grab and go, but it's just a matter of surrounding yourself with those choices. So it could be, like I said, maybe once a week. And hey, maybe you don't do the grocery shopping in your house. That's totally fine. Ask somebody in your household who does do the grocery shopping, or Instacart, carrots and baby cucumbers and hummus and Greek yogurts and chicken, grilled chicken strips and, a pre-made rotisserie chicken, like all that kind of stuff. You can just Instacart that to your office or Instacart that to your house, but make sure that your environment, what you're going to be able to grab and go, um, is set up for success. I can tell you in my own house, like my pantry, I have zero junk food. That doesn't mean that I never eat junk food. It just means when I get home from a long day, I know that I'm going to go straight to the chips if I don't have something equally like a Greek yogurt, equally as accessible. So that would be my first thing is looking at food environment.
Yeah, and that makes it really helpful to understand that really it comes down to just setting yourself up to make better choices and not just relying on willpower, right? And I love how you're not telling people to be perfect. It's be prepared, right?
Yes.
Making sure you understand what your week's going to look like, and maybe you get a frozen bag of broccoli to utilize, right? Which is processed, right? Yes, but you're still going to get a nutritional value than going to get a bar or something from the deli. So I love that, and it actually reminds me of a James Clear quote, the author of Atomic Habits. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, and that's really what you're saying is creating a system where you can allow people to make better choices. So we've covered a lot. with just kind of healthy eating and why it's hard between time and environment and just overwhelm. But there's another layer to all this. And if someone is looking from a high level overview, right, of all this information, misinformation, it typically has some form of a story behind it where they're getting it from, right? So, do you feel like there is a diet trend out there that you're constantly having to kind of set the record straight on a little bit?
Yeah, it's so crazy right now. I never thought I would live in a world where I have to defend vegetables, but here we are. There's like a crazy anti-vegetable trend going on. Luckily, I do feel like that is passing a little bit. And veggies are sort of back in vogue, which is great. But yeah, I would say just in general, again, everybody's looking for this like new paradox thing. So typically with nutrition, that turns into, oh, don't eat this. Oh, this food that you thought was good for you is actually really bad for you. And here's why. There's obviously medical reasons to avoid certain foods, but outside of that, any food that restricts a particular food or a particular
Mm,
food group completely eliminates it. I would say that's something to steer clear of because, again, that is typically just trying to sell some we've unlocked the secret type thing.
right.
A really interesting one that I've seen a lot lately is oats being demonized. That's like a thing that people are hating on right now. And I will say, just to combat that really quickly, you can isolate any compound in any food and anything that we breathe in and
Right.
anything that we drink that could be potentially harmful to one pathway in one cell somewhere, right? We have an extraordinary defense system, and with our gut and with our microbiome. So this idea that everybody just over the last decade has just been nitpicking random foods and saying, oh, this is actually toxic and dangerous. Again, is it good to eat oats as 100% of your diet? No, obviously not. But and again, that's where going back to that visual of if you can build a breakfast that has a little bit of oatmeal with fruit on top and eggs on the side or whatever. But yeah, I would say just any diet that is telling you outside of a medical reason that a food or a food group needs to be completely avoided, that is not a good dietary advice.
Yeah, especially right. Most diets start with positive, right, movement behind it, but when you take it to the extreme, that's where you can start to see things start to have a downside, right, and not
Mhm.
provide the benefit that you would need. So I want to have some room for Q&A from the audience. I think we have had a lot of questions pop up throughout the last 40 minutes, but if you can leave these guests with just two takeaways that would allow them to walk away with something tangible and applicable, what would they be?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is have a moment with yourself at some point and honestly evaluate your diet. Um, and really genuinely think to yourself, how often is this balance plate happening? There is a lot of light bulbs that go off when I do this exercise with people because they go, oh, that happens 0% of the time, or oh, that happens maybe once a week, right? So first identifying how often is this happening, and then the next step is why is it not happening. And then I would challenge people to take 1 to 2 actionable steps to change their food environment and to change whatever it is that's getting in their way of not making that happen. And what I mean by actionable steps is it's easy to say, oh crap, I'm realizing that my diet's not great. Okay, I've identified it, I've done my task for the day, but okay, what is the actual actionable step that you're going to take? Is it you're going to make a grocery list of grab and go, healthy, it passes the is it food test snacks that you're going to fill your pantry with or fill your office with? Is it that you're going to, like you said, buy microwavable veggies so that you always
Mm,
have a super easy veggie on hand at home at the end of the long day? I can give a lot of examples, and this is where sort of like that individualized stuff can be really helpful. I have a lot of examples on school. That's one of the reasons that we have that platform is for identifying stuff like that. But yeah, I would say first is start to use that visual wisdom. And maybe you have no idea. Maybe you've never even thought about what's on your plate. So challenge yourself to make those check marks of half my plate fruits and vegetable, quarter my plate protein, quarter my plate whole grain. And then again, if that's not happening, identifying actionable steps to actually make it happen.
Yeah, and while we were actually talking about this, the meal prep and the grab and goes, I wrote down a question, and I'm paraphrasing here that came in. So we're going to start the Q&A just for time purposes. But someone wrote in the chat, I have back-to-back meetings most days, maybe have 10 minutes to grab lunch. If I don't want to live on protein bars and snacks, what is a realistic way my meals can be balanced without spending my whole Sunday meal prepping? I think you might have touched on this as well, just towards the end there.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that's been a really awesome new thing in, I guess, the world of nutrition is the meal delivery companies and the meal
Yeah.
prep companies. Those are great to take advantage of, and I think lunches in particular for busy people. Factor is a really popular one. There's a bunch, Cook
Mm.
Unity, stuff like that. They are pre-prepped, microwavable. They have all the calories and macros. So if that's something that you are tracking or whatever, and almost 100% of them come balanced in the way that I described today, if you look through them. Also, if you live in a metropolitan area, most cities have local ones that, can deliver to anywhere in that city. So those are really, really great to take advantage of. Yes, they are slightly more expensive, but I would argue like the time benefit, the time cost benefit, and it really comes down to like for most of them around $11 a meal. So ultimately, I mean, when you're comparing that to going out to lunch, it's kind of right on par. So that would be a really great thing to take advantage of. And then also just again, what are some whole food things that are either non-perishable or easy that you can think about that you can keep in the fridge? Hard-boiled eggs instead of instead of a protein bar would be an example.
Awesome. And it looks like we have another question that came in: white rice versus brown rice. Wow, this is a good one. I hear this
Yeah,
pretty
definitely.
often.
So a lot of people, because it's white, think that white rice is refined, and it is kind of slightly, but not really. It's still considered a whole grain. It's not refined like the way that we refine whole wheat. So my answer is yes. Either, there's very minor differences between the two. Brown rice technically has slightly more fiber, slightly more B vitamins, but it's really not so much of a difference that it's like a health difference. So I typically tell people, eat whichever you enjoy.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question coming up from Jean Carlos. Is there any specific company you'd say is the best of those pre-prepped food delivery companies? Good question.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say best. I would say some are better at, you can do like full bulk ordering.
Mm,
So there's a company called Trifecta that you can actually order like just chicken breasts or just a big thing of rice or just a big thing of Brussels sprouts. So you don't have to necessarily get the meals. You can almost do like a la carte meal prep. So I do like Trifecta for that reason. I would say look at the sodium content would be the only thing that I would be concerned about
yeah.
potentially for some
Yeah.
of them. Factors can get a little high, and that would just be, going through the nutrition facts of each one of the meals. I would recommend trying to keep the sodium like definitely under 1,000 milligrams, a little bit lower if you can. I know that there's a company called Eat Clean Bro. That's a little bit of a newer one. Theirs tends to be a little bit, if I'm remembering correctly, theirs tends to be a little bit more lower sodium. But yeah, I would say just find the ones that work for you. Find, again, ones that offer those balanced plates, because obviously you're going to be able to find the, fettuccine Alfredos and all of them too. So, right. So choosing the ones that do have a lot of options for those balance. And then if you're interested in that a la carte option, either looking into a local one or I do like Trifecta for the a la carte options.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of these companies do put a lot of sodium for a preservative, and it could be more harmful than actually good. So a question came up earlier while we were talking about the protein, and it was more revolved around supplements. Marie, what are some of the supplements that you let's say recommend? Let's say top three supplements that have been researched for over the past X amount of years that's stood the test of time, so to speak. What would you recommend as far as a supplement choice? Obviously, there's going to be different goals depending, but what would you say would be some of the ones that you would recommend?
Yeah. So in general, the ones that have the most research that are, good quality. So creatine, which
Mm,
has been very buzzy lately, and this is
yeah.
actually a buzzy thing that has good research behind it. So Creatine has been shown, traditionally it's been used in, athletic situations, but it's actually a lot of information coming out about mental health, mental clarity, slowing degeneration, stuff like that. So there's a lot of good, interesting research around brain health with creatine. I do want to say that for all of these, make sure you get one that is third-party tested. So like Informed Choice is my favorite third-party tester. This just makes sure that the supplement is in fact what it says on the label. Brands that I love are Thorne and Momentous. Not sponsored by them or anything, but all their stuff is third-party tested, so super easy to go there. But yeah, so creatine is one. I would say magnesium is another one. Not so much that we need it. If you are like, I hit 100% of my meals as that balanced plate, and I rarely ever eat ultra processed food, you might not need magnesium. But with the standard American diet, we do not eat a lot of magnesium. That's going to come from whole nuts and seeds, beans, whole grains, and red meat. So mostly people are hitting it because they eat red meat, but not because they're eating a lot of good quality of those other foods. So a lot of times we are suboptimal in magnesium. So typically that would be something when I'm working with a client that we might need to get them started on to help kind of bridge that gap. And then the last thing I would say is fish oil, omega-3. Again, that's because if you think about omega-3s come from typically three places: fatty fish, so salmon, tuna, walnuts, and chia seeds. So again, if we're honest about our diets here in America and how often that is a part of our diet versus if you were living in, say, like Norway, that would be a huge part of your diet. That's just to bridge that gap because most people are probably not getting enough omega-3.
Yeah, and something interesting that with creatine, they're now showing boluses of 20 grams or more to prevent mental brain fog due to jet lag or a poor night of sleep. So definitely trending right now with a higher dosage versus years ago. We thought 5 grams with a loading phase was important, but that was looking at muscle. It wasn't looking at other different areas of the body that would be supported by creatine. So I'm glad you brought that up. And thank you for giving us the companies too, because I think a lot of times we don't know where to go, right? We hear
Yeah.
that there's good, creatine's good for you, but what would be a
Yeah.
proper,
And to be clear, it's not just those two companies. I just trust those,
yeah,
having
yeah.
again worked in this for like a decade. But if you Google Informed Choice, you can type in what you're looking for, creatine, magnesium. It'll show you a list of all the companies that you can get that have been third party tested.
Well, I'm going to go with our last question here. In regards to joint inflammation and healing, how important is diet? And do you have any recommendations in regards to this? Love it. Great way to end.
Yeah, this is so topical because I actually just posted a video about inflammation in our school. So this is very top of mind
Nice.
for me. So thank you. So yes, I mean, obviously it's not the whole story, right? There are a lot of things that can contribute to joint inflammation. But yes, what you eat can absolutely impact it. And then when it comes to inflammation specifically for joints, with nutrition, it's actually more about not getting in your own way than it is nutrition actually healing. Obviously, you need to eat enough protein. You need to eat enough. If you are doing that balanced plate, you are, getting enough protein. But it's about avoiding stuff that can cause or worsen that inflammation. So
Yeah.
typically, that's going to come from alcohol, is like the number one thing, and then the second thing is going to be excessive sugar intake or excessive saturated fat intake. When I say sugar, I mean added sugar. So a lot of that stuff that I was saying earlier to kind of think about really reducing in your diet, anyways. There are a lot of foods that have pro inflammatory compounds, and there's a variety of different foods that you can get this from. And this is why that color side of the plate is so important, because they're primarily coming from fruits and vegetables. And it's not just what you typically think. Like, yes, vitamin C, like vitamins, minerals, very important. But also, there's a bunch of compounds called polyphenols that are anti-inflammatory that you're not going to find in supplements, that you're not going to find in these ultra processed foods. So that's why, again, prioritizing those fruits and vegetables. The deeper the color, typically, it's not always the case, but typically the deeper the color, the more of those anti-inflammatory compounds you're going to find. But I mean, there's anti-inflammatory compounds in like olives and olive oils and fatty fish and whole grains, right? So again, building that plate is kind of an easy way to not really have to worry about, oh, am I reducing inflammation or not?
Yeah, what a great way to end it, Marie. Thank you for not only cutting through the noise, but also just giving people real life tools that they can use when things feel a little overwhelming when it comes to information and figuring out what to do and how to do it. Now, I'm confident this is not going to be the last one of these webinars. This was absolutely amazing. But for anyone looking or thinking, hey, this is awesome. I want to learn more about this and stay up to date and on top of maybe what I'm doing currently week by week. How can someone follow you? Maybe explain a little bit more just about what that school community looks like and how they can stay connected.
Yeah, definitely. So we can go ahead and push out the school landing page for everybody that's here today. So like I said, it's a, VIP community, but there is, if you want to see kind of behind that screen on the About Us page, there is a tour that you can take before joining the community. So you can see all the different community tabs. You can really get a look, like a peek behind the curtain of what's going on. So again, in that community, I hop on once a week for a live just like this. And if you're unable to make that time, you can throw your answers in the chat ahead of time, and I'll go ahead and make sure that those are answered. And then I always upload that live session, so you can kind of go back and watch and get your question answered. You can also feel free to reach out to me. We can push on my email as well. It's just marie@focusnyc.com. Like I said, I do one-on-one, and I'm happy to kind of guide you towards whether it's our school resource or any other resources. Yeah, I'm happy to kind of get to know people and steer them in the right direction.
And I think the link, Marie, would be focusnyc.com/edge. Is that if they wanted to kind of take this away?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we can put it up on the screen just so people can write that down as well. But Marie, thank you for joining us. Everybody who joined in today, thank you for attending. Marie, thanks for sharing your time, your expertise, and your no BS approach. I think everything we took away today is truly applicable. And I hope that we can all stay in touch with you and the school community to continue learning and decoding all the science that's out there. So thank you again for everyone that joined. Thank you again for Marie. And we hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.